Three, two, one. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Quantum Institute. I'm here today. I'm Jack Connor, your host. I'm here today with Josh Weinberg, longtime friend and fellow science enthusiast, as well as actually one of the inspirations for this show, as he's somebody I tend to send lots of science-based text messages to, and decided that rather than bother him, it might be good just to
Bother
express
everybody
my
else.
bother everybody else. Exactly. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cool, cool. Tell us a little about yourself. What is your favorite planet?
My favorite planet. That's actually a good question. I think I it might seem a little obvious, but I think I have my like a lot of people these days. I think I have my eyes to Mars because it's certainly on the I think because for two reasons. I actually have two favorites, but
Mm-hmm.
my Mars for sure because it's one that the scientific community as well as the non-scientific community are getting excited about again. So the possibility of Mars is becoming very real, and
Yeah.
so that is exciting to me. And the notion that like Mars itself, the terrain is really similar. It has something of an atmosphere. Doesn't have a magnetic field, and it'd be very difficult to terraform, but it's something we can conceptualize terraforming, and it's like
It's got
it's a
water
place.
too.
It's got water. It's similar enough to Earth that we could land there and like set up a habitat and live very comfortably and be all right. So that's a place that I'm really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
The other place.
Well, actually, could I jumping in on Mars too? One of the things that I adds to that for me is that the basically the engineering challenges of making like that habitat, of getting there, of like all the steps that would take to actually, like I don't know, have a team live on Mars for 2 years, for example, or something like that. That even like 20 years ago was just like doable, but basically insane, and
Mm-hmm.
now has gotten more and more and more and more and more into the realm of like, yeah, we could do that, and it actually wouldn't be, like the entire GDP of the United States, or it's
Right,
not like
right.
it's not the level of insanity it is because just our technology has gotten so much better, and our basically our science has gotten a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. Our science has gotten better, and also cannot be understated the amount of enthusiasm that's coming from laymen these days. I mean, it used to be this like, if you want to so much as leave the Earth, that's got to be a huge government initiative, and it's either
Mm-hmm.
got to have like military, strategic value, or something like that. Bottom line, we went to the moon to scare the Soviets and to scare the commies, and that was it. That was the only way we were able to, get off this rock, to get the funding for it, and it had to be this government initiative. But then,
But we scared them
in these
good.
days, we sure did, yeah. But these days, you have people like Richard Branson and
Just can you talk a
you have
little closer to the microphone? Sorry about that.
yeah. No. You have private citizens who have lots of money and who are really excited about it, and they're taking people like like Justin Bieber to space for
Oh, you
fun.
can swear on the show if you want. You can say fuck.
Oh, cool. I mean, but that so you have it's proved to be something that's like it's just a matter of funding,
Yeah.
you know. So
And I
yeah,
agree 100% that I think that Mars is one of those goals that at least a lot of people can get behind. You know what I mean? When you talk like a mission to Europa, which actually
which
we
is
should
really
talk about at some point
interesting.
because that's up there with one of the most interesting places. But just
Yeah,
most
no, that's
people
my
don't
second
know anything
favorite.
about it. Like in popular culture, aside from a brief cameo in Gattaca, you know what I mean? Like a mission to Europa doesn't mean anything to your average to most people, but like
Well,
going to
people
Mars is
aren't
something
really
we know
familiar
about.
with Europa.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your number two?
Yeah, no, Europa is definitely my number two, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, of course, it's on a lot of people's minds right now because they're fairly confident there's a liquid ocean, that's very similar in makeup to our own.
Mm-hmm.
It's and it's got a lot of the basic elements that we look for when we're looking for possible harbors or possible places where life could have evolved. But also, in lieu of an atmosphere, it's got 60 miles of ice. So, instead of, if you land on Mars, it would be, at the very least a century or probably centuries of terraforming to be able to walk outside of a habitat and breathe normally. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you went to a place like Europa, it would be as simple as carving a hole, like, digging way down and carving a hole in the ice and using that pocket as its own, like, having as your own kind of using the ice as your atmosphere. And you can kind of carve out a little like pocket in the ice and live comfortably near the ocean where it's warm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little like subterranean thing, and then of course like use the ice for both water and for and to make oxygen and all kinds of stuff like that.
It's totally feasible to create a self-sustaining colony there. I mean, I think I would argue it's easier there than it is on Mars. It's just different because Mars is closer. But there was actually an article in Science News recently, like in one of the most recent last few issues,
mm-hmm.
on how they're trying to figure out how to drill, because the ice on Europa, it's not just ice. I mean, it's tougher than granite here.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be enough to just send our toughest drill there and just let it go. It would get chewed up pretty quickly. So they have all these ideas. One of the ideas that they were pitching was this drill that had all, like a ridiculous amount of teeth on it, but it also had essentially rockets pointing forward. So it would drill and it would also be blasting rockets straight down. So it would be trying to melt the ice as it was drilling, and this is something that it's amazing what they've done. This one of the other models, I think, and it'll probably end up being some combination of the two. But one of the other models was something that they literally throw. They just hurl it at the ice as hard as they can, and it's kind of like a missile. And just by crashing into the ice, it embeds into it. And they throw it as hard as they can. It like crashes in the ice. It burrows in just from the force of the impact, and then maybe it would start kind of drilling and trying to melt and trying to get its way down.
Yeah.
But like they have a little like 2-liter soda bottle version of it that they have been hurling at like walls of ice to see how far they could get it in.
By the way, the phrase "drilling with rockets" is got to be one of the most badass things in like imaginable.
But this is why it's a really actually exciting time.
Oh yeah,
to be part of the scientific community, or to even like support it, because all these things that seem kind of ridiculous and far out are becoming very much like not only practical but the most efficient and feasible ways to do these things. Drill with fire. It sounds ridiculous.
It's true. We're kind of in an age where it feels like a lot of technology is getting so good that like nothing's really off the table. You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. And it's just, there's something about that speaks very loudly to science fiction as a genre.
Oh yeah.
Because there really is no science fiction yet. There's science, as I think you and I have said many times. There's really just science not yet. But there's very few things you can come up with that somebody's going to say, nope, can't be done, never. I mean, unless, no real scientist will look at anything and say, like, no, never.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of defeats the point of what it is to be a scientist.
I would, 100%. And for the...
I wanted to say one more
go ahead.
Thing on that topic. The most recent rover they landed on Mars, that looked like a straight-up UFO landing.
Oh, I was going to say, you were at the New York Times Square thing where they showed it, like, on the big... On the big screen, right? You had all those photos, and it was like
on the big screen. The big screen was like a Dunkin' Donuts ad, and then above that, there was a tiny screen that like normally just kind of says the clock or like how
Mhm.
far into the year we are, but like this tiny screen. So if you can imagine being in the front row of a movie theater where the movie screen is about a fifth the size it normally is and 10 stories taller, we were all just staring straight up, and there was like 100 of us nerds at 1 a.m, and like it was even kind of raining, and NASA was walking around handing out free buttons, free pins, and we were just like crying and cheering watching this thing happen because it was the most absurd. It wasn't, I mean, it didn't just like the last rovers, they were tough enough that they could just inflate giant balloons around them and just drop them on the the terrain and let them bounce. This one had to be really protected, so it has this. If I remember correctly, it had a chute open, and then the chute dropped, and then it started to free fall, and then the rockets stopped it, and then it like kind of spreads out its legs. I mean, if you watch this on Earth, you would think we were under attack by some like really bizarre alien life form.
Yeah, it's the engineering behind that was so cool.
And it was something they were getting laughed at when they were presenting it, to the people in charge at NASA, and they were saying, "I know it looks ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it's also the most feasible way to do this."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just thought that was a great example because, like, I'm 29. Like, we missed all of the real space race stuff from clearly, from the '60s and
Right.
up until like through the kind of the golden age of the Apollo program, which was what '60s and '70s. And it's sort of like, but as two people that are just like so into this in such a nerdy way, like I'm glad, it's cool that it's like it's becoming a thing again. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
It's not just like it's not like that episode of The Simpsons where they just space launches are getting preempted by like tennis matches or something like that.
Right, and they're boring, and they're trying to get ratings, and that Simpsons episode was great because I think who was it, Buzz Aldrin or somebody who was on a guest starring who was on it, Homer smashes the ant farm, and they say, "Now we'll never know if ants can be trained to sort tiny screws in space."
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like something so pointless and silly, and like, but that's the best. For the longest time, that's kind of the best NASA had to offer us, was like, that's what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong, the nitty gritty is like really important, and these random little facts. I mean, we understand how planets form because one of the astronauts just decided to leave coffee grounds in a bag and see how it would, and inflate the bag and then see what would happen. And then all of a sudden, accretion,
Mm-hmm.
We learned that like things, no matter how small, like drift together. So like these little things that we and The Simpsons, and we love The Simpsons for making fun of, they are actually significant in their own ways. But
Mm-hmm.
what you didn't have for years and years is you didn't have these giant, ambitious projects that the general public could get excited about.
Yeah.
That motivated people to want to be a part of it, not only be excited about it and support it by, hanging flags out their door, but like students were majoring in science and engineering and math and not, and really wanting to be a part of it in any way. And, you've probably, Jack, you've probably seen it, but I would encourage everybody to go on YouTube and find Neil deGrasse Tyson's address to the Senate Budgetary Committee or whatever it was when he was trying to explain why it was important to fund NASA.
Mm-hmm.
And how like our failing economy and our lack of jobs and our lack of progress and our lack of engineers and our no funding for NASA and for big government projects, like that they're not isolated incidents.
Yeah.
It's absolutely right.
Well, and sort of wrapping up this topic, I just want to, speaking of planets, something that we've talked about that I did, was looking into in a major way was, the Enceladus ice volcanoes. For those of you out there who may not know, it's basically a planet that is called Enceladus that's orbiting around Jupiter that gets such a gravitational squeeze from it, or this is the theory at least, that it basically has a ginormous volcano that takes up about 1/6 of the entire area of the entire planet. And it shoots.
We're saying planets, by the way, about like Europa and Enceladus. Technically, they're moons.
Yeah, they're moons. They're moons, but it's like I think it's less than half the size of the Earth, but not much less. Something along. So it's but it's somewhere
But yeah,
a size that it's bigger than it might be bigger than like something like Venus potentially. But
yeah.
anyway, this thing is like this would get my vote for like the most metal thing in the universe because it just shoots these enormous sprays of ice into space because it gets like basically it gets squeezed almost like a rubber ball or something and shoots
I'm
all
pretty
the ice
sure.
which then goes to form some of the rings of Jupiter, which is, and if you look at the pictures, like it is equal parts like scary and incredible. I don't know.
It's
It's
sublime, is what it
yeah.
is. It's truly sublime. I mean, and they're fairly confident that the majority of Saturn's rings are coming from this little moon that has liquid water. I mean, and actually it doesn't appear to have the same kind of tidal friction that a moon like Europa has. Europa is
Mm-hmm.
being pulled by Jupiter and by the other moons, and so it's flexing a little bit enough that it's heating up the interior, so you can have a liquid ocean. And Enceladus doesn't appear to have an orbit that would do that as of right now, and I might be wrong, and I'm sure there's many different opinions on the matter, but I don't think they're entirely sure why it's warm enough to have this liquid ocean. But
Mm-hmm.
there is, but you're right, it does have this like what it does do is regularly the whole thing is just like not a hot spot, a cold spot, and they actually call them. I'm pretty sure they're called
Yeah,
cryovolcanoes,
cryovolcanoes. That's right.
and they
And
and
it's
they're with such they go up the geysers go up with such pressure with such speed that they clear the gravity of that little moon, that little tiny rock, and just is feeding Saturn these rings.
mm-hmm.
And over millions and billions of years, you have the ring system being formed from this geyser.
Mm-hmm. And I know there
You're
was some
right.
theories too that there's been questions, something along the line. People question why the rings still exist, why they haven't collapsed into Jupiter and Saturn, and this actually provides somewhat of it's not, I don't think it's proven yet, but it provides an explanation for, well, this is something that actually can refresh those on a regular basis over
Right.
something along those
Right.
lines. Well, that's good. Should we move on to our first topic?
Wasn't that our first topic? Was these? Or was
Yeah, it
that?
kind
Or
of
was
was.
that just kind of?
That was our informal first topic.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
go
don't know.
on.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about another thing we discussed privately, but I talked about that the warp drive that NASA released the drawings of, and which basically I don't know if it was if it was how secretive, but it seemed pretty damn secretive that even that they were seriously working on this because to back up, NASA released a series of photos from one of their labs, from a lab from a guy named Harold T. White, who, looking into his profile, is basically a certified genius.
Mm-hmm.
And they were drawings of, they were like really, really detailed sketches, almost like for, like, that would work for like the new Star Wars movie or something like that, for like storyboarding of what a warp drive ship would look like. Um, as part of this, that they didn't mention too much in, I think it was the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, wherever it was, but like looking in further is that this guy who sort of commissioned these drawings for NASA, he's in charge of a department that's actually experimenting with this, that they're basically trying to like wrangle in this technology, which is really early stage,
Mm-hmm.
but basically involves using what's called negative energy to create either one of the ways to do a wormhole, which is actually sort of a slightly different theory from what they're working on. But what they're working on is a subliminal tunnel, which is where you would contract space in front of you. So rather than be 10 light years in front of you, take all that space in front of you, and it contracts to a really short distance, and then expands all of the space behind you. So if you're in the ship, you don't actually feel movement. What it does is basically all the distance behind you expands and all the distance in front of you disappears, where you're in a bubble of just normal seeming space time, and all of a sudden you're there, basically.
Right. It's the way to get around um, the the golden rule of, you can't move any object faster than the speed of light. It's how you get around that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and how you get around the simple fact that even if you could theoretically move an object, a spaceship, fast, at the speed of light, say,
Mm-hmm.
it would still take you, let's see, 4 years to get. I think the nearest star,
3.4 to Proxima Centauri. Yeah.
Yeah, is what 4.5? Is that what you said?
I think 3.4 years, if I remember right. 3.4 light years away.
Yeah, so that's the nearest star. That's nothing. If we wanted to really see our galaxy or really get out of here, even if we were to travel at the speed of light, it would just take generations and generations living aboard this, essentially a giant minivan. That's just not really an option for us. So, the warp drive was, we can assume that people have been, better minds than ours have been equally excited, if not probably more so. Actually, definitely more so, because there are plenty of people who've probably been spending their life trying to figure out, you can imagine people who, grew up watching Star Wars or even Star Trek, and they just started sitting down and doing the math and trying to figure out how it would be possible, because, science is great in that it always gives vague answers to the really exciting questions. When you say something like, hey, professors, whoever, is it possible to make a warp drive? They're not going to say, nope, not at all. They're going to say, hey, anything's possible. And then, the kid who asks that is going to say, sweet, I'm on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you got, it was only a matter of time before.
Also, we were talking about science fiction and how science fiction influences, where directions people might want to study or what they want to invent and stuff. And,
right.
And this actually comes from Star Trek. And while the science in Star Trek was basically, someone might kill me for this, but basically non-existent. The theory was right that it's you warp space, as opposed to pushing an object, you warp space so that you feel like you move,
Right.
and that's the workaround, and that's why you don't have to go, a light ray. You're not actually going faster than you're not outpacing a light ray in that same amount of space. It's still going to beat you. If there's one next to it, basically on a parallel track, then you would beat that. But it's sort of it's the equivalent of saying, I'm not going to beat you in a foot race, so I'm going to, take a motorcycle or something like that. I'm going to have a workaround.
I'm not going to beat you if we're running on a track, but if I get on a moving walkway.
Precisely.
And the ground that I'm running on is actually moving past me. Then I'll beat you, and it's a different. It changes the conditions of the game. And there's a lot of, the laws of physics will, I don't know, it seems like very often they'll tell you, when you're trying to figure out something, they'll say, it's not impossible, to do this. And that usually means that it's possible, we just haven't figured it out yet.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. They're not, you're not going to say, we'll say that, you can't really move an object faster than the speed of light for, because E equals mc squared, because, there's not enough energy in the universe to move something that fast or whatever. Things break down at the speed of light. But, is it possible to get around that? Well, yeah, sure, why not? There's nothing that says we can't. That's my favorite answer, by the way, in science.
There's nothing that says we can't?
Yeah, you'll see programs on, there was a program, I think, on the Science Channel recently, about living forever, and could we possibly live for thousands of years at a time,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the answer. It's there's no reason why we can't. Nobody technically dies of old age. They die of, failing parts of their body or diseases that afflict them, but, no reason why we couldn't figure out, one by one cures to all these things, and, we're already growing new organs in petri dishes and figuring out new insane ways to treat diseases. It's no reason why we can't.
Go back to the warp drive too. One of the interesting things about it. Do you see? And for anybody listening, any of our millions of listeners, if you see, you saw the drawings, and there's like those. Basically, there's the ship. The like I keep calling it sort of like the star, like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek-ish ship.
You
And
can
then
call it the Millennium Falcon. I don't think anybody will get mad at you.
yeah, so the Millennium Falcon and it gets going through a series of rings, right? Those like white rings.
Right.
What is interesting, and it kind of makes me think that this is actually much more of a marketing move, which I totally approve of, because NASA, like, yeah, get some marketing going. Let's get this. Let's get this interest. Let's get this thing's like really rolling. But is that the actual warp drive part is in those rings? It's not in the ship. That ship is basically that could have been almost. I mean, it could have looked. From what I understand, it could have looked any of many different. It could have had many different forms, and the actual science is in the rings. It's not something that you control within the ship. It's something that gets controlled from outside of it, because you're creating this like faster than light tunnel kind of thing. So I just thought that was kind of interesting, because again, I do sort of like have a tendency to look for the marketing, like what what's being sold to me and stuff like that. And it's pretty, if you're gonna market something, man, like at least you're making it look really cool. And I approve of that.
Well,
And
things are designed. Oh, I'm sorry. Finish.
oh, no. And I was yeah, I mean, just wrapping up, this wasn't particularly stressed in any of the things I read. And I'm not sure if that's just because it didn't dive too deep into the science itself, or if it maybe it was just like kind of overlooked, or not really talked about too much by the report that was given out by NASA itself. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the 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 future, certainly the technological future, and the present is very much shaped by our um, expectations of it and our desires for it. So I saw. I'll tell you what I mean by that. I saw a program once that I think there's a program that I think it's on the History Channel or Discover, something like that, where they're talking about prophets of science fiction or something, and they're talking about people like Jules Verne and how amazing it is that they were so accurate in their predictions, which is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. I mean, the thing is, a generation of people grew up reading Jules Verne and said, holy shit, I want to go to the moon. And, they didn't use it by firing, cannons at the Earth, but they kind of did. They started building what they had imagined, what had been planted in their imagination by Jules Verne. So when we grow up watching television shows or hearing, fantasy stories about people going, to distant galaxies, or using very specific technology and very specific looking technology, then it's not that like, oh my goodness, they were right when they, or anything like that. Like, holy good, it looks just like the Millennium Falcon. It doesn't, but it looks, like these kind of starships that we've grown up seeing. It's not because those are necessarily the most practical. It's just because that's what we expected, that's what we wanted, and that's what we designed. We have way more control over the way our world looks than we think we do. We think that technology is this thing that kind of advances on a purely logical basis. Like we do, like scientists just kind of take logic and practicality and put it out there and build things based on what what logic dictates they should look like, and then lo and behold, they look like our wildest fantasies, and that's not the case. I mean, scientists, whether they want to, and engineers, and I think most of them will admit this, that like the fantasy has every bit to do with with the logic and with the practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's hey, we get our inspiration from everywhere. You know what I mean? And if you grow up watching Star Trek, you might be interested in warp drives, because I'm a huge fan of Doctor Who, and I don't know if that's related to, but like I've long been interested in the the physics of like things like time loops and time travel and all kinds of stuff like that. And I think that those two, in my mind, those two bounce off each other a lot. because it's I don't know if you know anything about Doctor Who, but it's a show about basically it's about a dude with a time machine.
Right.
Um,
I mean, I
and
know you keep telling me I need to watch it, and I mean,
keep
I'm
not
sure
watching it.
I probably should at this
It's
point.
on the Netflix queue somewhere. I'm sure. But yeah, but you know what I mean? It's the what inspires us to do cool to, what's going to inspire me to spend, 50,000 hours of my life working on a dream of mine is going to be it could just be like one, that one childhood moment. Like what was that movie October Sky, the Tobey Maguire one that I think all of us had to watch in science class in high school, where basically he sees the main character there. He sees Kaputnik. What was the first Russian satellite?
Sputnik.
Sputnik. Kaputnik. Sorry.
Sputnik.
But it's based on a true story. Basically, one of the U.S.'s leading rocket scientists grew up in a mining town and saw Sputnik, and then from that moment on, all he could think about was rockets. All he cared
Right.
about was rockets, and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and got scholarships and ended up working for Werner von Braun after he had fled the Nazis, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff. And basically, yeah, who knows? I mean, it's just one moment of just kind of cool inspiration can lead to just like what the motivation that it takes to really get something awesome done. And if you're
Right.
talking about things like space travel, really high tech science, you need that motivation because man, this stuff takes a long time and a lot of research and development to come to light. So, you know,
Right. No, absolutely, and it's being it's always something that's going to be led by people who are truly passionate about it for its own sake. You
hmm
know, um, that's why I think I don't know if it was in that same speech the Senate, but when Neil Tyson at one point was saying that when it comes to going just up into orbit and maybe even taking trips to the moon, that'll be done by small companies. Looking because like people like Richard Branson who can make profit, and it's actually fairly safe, and we're fairly good at it now. We can get people up and we can take them around. But when it comes to big projects, that involve going to Mars or something, that has very there's no way around it. Like, it's got a very low survival rate, and while we may one day figure out how to mine successfully asteroids and Mars and make boatloads of money. At first, it's not going to be a very profitable business. It's going to have a very low success rate,
yeah.
and it's going to be something that is going to require government initiative. And this is something that Neil Tyson believes. And personally, I don't know. I'm not convinced that we won't have our own kind of industrial revolution of space where private citizens will just get
Oh,
fed
I
up
think
and figuring out how to do it.
yeah. Well,
But
I think that for sure we will, and I think that both of these are actually right. Where, for instance, Richard Branson, if he decided that he wanted to send, throw all of Virgin's resources to send a manned mission to Europa, like we talked about, I mean, he could have like the passion and the drive for that, but even as like founder, CEO, and godlike figurehead of Virgin, he wouldn't be able to start spending a dollar on that unless he got approval from all of his investors, had a business plan.
right,
You know what I mean? Like, then this is not just the business. This is also like legal. He's not, if he has a business, he's not spending his own personal money. That
right.
is really
But again,
illegal.
yeah,
Bernie Madoff
the issue.
will confirm that. And
Well,
so
no,
it's his
yeah,
hands are tied to a certain extent. So I do see both of these working where, um, if you have like Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, if government pushes the boundary, like NASA, I don't like really saying government because it can also be multiple governments like the International Space Station or
right,
confederations and stuff like that. But they push the boundaries of what is possible, and then once what was once insane, like going to the moon, starts becoming more and more reasonable from a financial perspective, from a safety perspective, from a commercial
right,
perspective, it becomes money making. Then private industry swoops in and really like tightens that shit up, like tightens that ship up, like makes it like, fully feasible, like basically, so for instance, like the government will be the first, NASA or some other entity, maybe the Chinese NASA, I forget what it's called, will be the first to send a manned mission to Mars. But then 100 years later, it's going to be Virgin Galactic. That's that's actually setting up one of the first like 10,000 person colonies or something like that. You
Yeah,
know what I
no,
mean?
it'll be it'll certainly be private companies that start that really expand it.
Yeah, like flesh it out,
That's,
something like
but
that.
look, that's just what's happening now, isn't it? I mean, it took government initiative, it took a military threat, and our government wanting to flex its muscles in front of the Soviets to go to the moon, but years later they did nothing else with it, and it is private companies that are developing, commercial spaceflight.
Mm-hmm. God, I want to go on one of those so bad.
What's that?
Could we? What do you think's the logistics of like stowing away on like a Virgin Galactic flight like into space? Do you think that's possible?
I wouldn't. I mean, again,
like that scene in Passenger 57 where he drives the car onto like he like jumps onto the wheel of the moving plane and then ends up like sneaking onto the plane by like crawling up it. Do you think you can do that with like a space flight?
Well, here's the thing. I think that I mean, could you? I feel like security there would be beyond insanely tight. So are there like experts in, like Ocean's 12 or Ocean's 11, rather, expert, groups that know how to sneak in past security and break into things, and like, is it possible? Sure, but would the compartment that you sneak into be pressurized? Would you have oxygen? Would you be? I mean, you might bring your own oxygen tank, but would it be pressurized? Would you freeze to death? Would you? I mean, if you snuck somewhere where they weren't planning on housing people, you might be a real short trip.
So you're saying that I need to think beyond just getting like a fake mustache to to sneak on.
Well, I mean, I'm well, first of all, part of the burden of your Irish roots is you can only get a fake mustache. But
I can grow a 15-year-old Mexican boy's mustache. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, talk to me when you have Armenian and Eastern European Jewish descent and have and wool growing places you didn't know it belonged. But
that'd be a good topic. The genetics of hairiness. We'll do that in a further show. I remember that one time when we were in the East Village and we got shaved. By the time you walked out, you had like a 5 o'clock shadow. That was
when we went for the straight razor shave.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
I did after lunch. I had a shadow back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, so.
I actually had a question to ask.
Going away.
Oh, go ahead.
What? I think it's actually, and I mean, I think you brought it up in jest, but I think it's actually, I wouldn't be surprised if there were people who really did try and sneak onto these flights to try and get out into space, and I think there will be incidents where people will try and people will die horribly.
Well, there was I need to look this up because I forget the exactly what happened, but basically there was I don't know if it was private or if it was something like NASA, but there was basically an open volunteer thing for a future manned mission to Mars that did not involve coming back. That was to set up the first Mars colony that was a permanent colony. And something like 200,000 people like volunteered for this, meaning that 200,000 people said they would want to go to Mars if they could, knowing that there was no return flight.
No. Mars. You're talking about Mars One, which is a nonprofit based in the Netherlands, and this is actually really, I mean, this would warrant a full show on its own. This is you have, and they've already had. Yeah, you're right. I think 200,000 applicants. Their ultimate mission is to just get a colony on Mars a self-sustaining colony on Mars. Their goal is to launch the first unmanned pod, because they would need to send certain essentials ahead of time, like the habitat to build.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That pod is going to launch in, I think, 2018. That's their goal. And then in 2024, I believe I'm getting this right. In 2024, they're going to send their first crew of 4. And then their mission statement, they say, in 24, they send their first group of 4, and then every 2 years after that, they send another group of 4. So they keep growing and growing this colony and building it out.
So do you think if you show up on like the second or third wave, like the people already there will be like, psh, I was on Mars and there's only 4 people here.
Yeah, I was here before it was cool. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I think, to be perfectly honest, it's something I've thought about a lot. And I think there would be mixed feelings. I think on one hand, there would be this, like, what do you know, rookie? I've been on the job long before, you were here. But I think if you got to think about it this way, you're on Mars, right? I've been, it's summer, we have our windows up, and I've been swatting away flies, this whole conversation. And go to Mars, there is not another living thing present. I don't mean other people. You have the 3 people that, you're with, and you don't so much as have a squirrel climbing up a tree outside. You don't have a tree outside. You don't have insects. They'll have plants growing in a greenhouse, and who knows if they'll bring, certain types of, insects or something with them. Whatever they'll bring.
Well, it has got to be such a carefully balanced environment. Like.
But yeah. So I think that the and again, like, it's going to be a couple of years without new people, and then so the first time might be a little awkward. I think the reaction, and of course it's speculation from someone like me who's just a science enthusiast, but unfortunately, since this has never been done before, it will only be speculation from anybody. I don't care what their field is.
Yeah.
Whether or not they'll respond by being so excited to see another person. I mean, really tears and hugs as if they were greeting an old family member. And I suspect a bunch of these people will know each other already because they'll be training together. But so happy to see another person. I like to think that they'd be more overwhelmed by those feelings than by, you made the coffee the wrong way or something stupid where it's like, ordinarily this is the chair I like to sit in the afternoon.
I would hope that, I'd hope that.
And there will be problems, but, we have no idea how they'll respond and how they'll act to each other, how they'll feel about, Earth, even, 4 years, 8 years, 30 years from now.
I don't know if you ever read any Robert Heinlein, but what was the book? Mars. It's a book about Mars. But there's I would hope that they really take into consideration something that he's talked about a few times, which is basically that for these long missions, like, you have to be really, really careful about the psychological profile, or at least be, really in tune to the psychological profile of the people that you're sending. So, for instance, like, Prometheus, when they got there, and the one guy's like, I don't like you, and I'm just here to do my job. Yeah. And it's like, you're light years away. You're never, that's insane. Like, you're not down in the mine. You know what I mean? Right. Like, you're not like on Earth where if you don't like the person, you can just quit and go somewhere else. Like, you have to figure out like how these will mesh because when you have 4 people running a thing, or 8 people, or even 100 people, or 10,000 people, everybody's job is extremely important. You know what I mean? Right. Like, every little thing has to be, regulated. Every drop of water has to be regulated down, and every bite of food.
And actually, there's a professor of physics. I'll give a shout out to Andy Rivers. Who you met, we were friends with, and he used to...
from Northwestern, yeah.
Yeah, from Northwestern. But we knew him, and he used to come over to Sunday dinner when you and I were still in high school, and he and his wife would come by, and she was a chemist and he was a physics professor, and we would just kind of talk science for over dinner. And I remember he explained it, about why we haven't gone to Mars yet, because certainly we have the technology. We've had it for years. We've been able technologically to go. But he puts it great. He says, okay, so pick a few people, pick 3 people, your family, for example, or people you are close to, people whose company you don't mind, so maybe not your family, but, and you're going to drive across country with them from New York to LA. You're going to do it in a minivan. The windows are going to be up. You're not going to be able to crack the windows. You're going to have enough gas, so you're not going to need to stop. In fact, you're not going to be allowed to stop. And it's going to take you 2 years. 2 years in a minivan with the same 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't so much as crack a window.
Terrible food, too. Don't forget about that.
What's that?
With space food, too. There's no stopping at Wendy's or anything like that.
Yeah, no. With the same, you're going to eat the same stuff. But, I mean, the problem is not technological. The problem has always been psychological, because there is not a profile you can come up with. There is not I venture to say that you'd probably be safer with sociopaths, to be honest, who believe in the mission for one reason or another. But, I mean, there's not a psychologically sound person you can come up with that will be able to be in that kind of environment in those close quarters with the same 3 people for 2 years without losing their mind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they're doing different things. First of all, the warp engine is one thing. They also just released an article. They're getting very close to being able to do cryo sleep, right? You might want to. You can do it.
That would be one definitely worth doing. A topic worth talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a much easier solution to it. It's just make sure everybody's asleep, and then 2 years later they wake up and they're there and they just have work to do.
Mm-hmm. Unless the HAL 9000 ejects them into space. I just watched 2001 again, and HAL is pretty funny because watching it again, you realize he's basically just kind of like a little kid that doesn't quite know how to react to things. Yeah. And it's pretty hilarious. Well, except that he kills everybody.
Yeah, but you know what? Actually, and 2010, people give it a hard time. It's not Kubrick. It's a completely different feel to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But they offer, I think, the greatest. They actually explain what happened with HAL, and it's brilliant. What happened? They explained that what had happened with HAL was that the crew was not supposed to be made aware of the true mission, of the real purpose of their mission.
Mm-hmm.
But HAL, as the onboard computer, was privy to all the information, and he was told by the powers that be not to lie. And his programming was taking in information and spitting it out accurately. And so he could not even conceptualize how to lie. So he essentially was having a breakdown through the whole first movie because he's supposed to lie and he doesn't know how.
Hey, so this brings us to actually kind of maybe wrap up the show with a final little section of talking about upcoming sci-fi movies. I feel like it wouldn't be a proper science show if we didn't do a little discussion of some of the stuff that's coming out.
Agreed. Did you want to do the liquid metal, or do you want to save this?
We could save that for another one maybe.
That's fine.
Yeah, I try to keep these capped at about an hour, so that'd be so we might not have time for it.
What are we at now? What's our time?
About 50 minutes.
All right, great.
Yeah, so 10 or 15 minutes left. So the 2 sci-fi movies coming out is a Korean movie called Snowpiercer, which I saw, which is really good, and Transformers: Age of Extinction. These are the 2 sci-fi movies. There's a lot of other movies coming out, which, if it's anything like any of the other Transformers movies, will literally make me want to commit seppuku. Because those movies just drove me crazy, basically.
What's his name? Who's been directing those?
Michael fucking
Abrams.
Bay.
Yeah, should Abrams have committed seppuku a long time ago?
No, it's Michael Bay, not J.J. Abrams. Yeah.
J.J. Abrams. Very different story. J.J. Abrams I trust with any sci-fi.
I thought 8mm kind of sucked. Or 8, what was it? Not 8 millimeter. That's the one. That's a very different movie. um,
That is not a sci-fi movie.
the one that was like
Unless you
basically
consider
like
it science fiction that Nicolas Cage has an acting career.
yeah the his modern what was the modern day ET one? Do you know what
Oh,
I'm talking about?
Echo?
No. Where the kids find the alien in the
Oh,
train.
that no, it is. It's like it's not 8 millimeter. It's something like that. I didn't see
That would be
that.
a movie mashup I would want to see though. That kind of sucked.
But
I
I'll tell
wasn't.
you,
I know a lot of
But
people
Star
liked it.
Trek was wonderful,
Which one?
and it was Star Trek was wonderful, and
Yeah,
it's probably the most successful reboot I've ever seen.
agreed. I thought the
So go on.
yeah. Anyway, Transformer. I mean, my opinion of Transformers is like these movies represent everything I hate about Hollywood. In that, like, they're terrible. They're almost unwatchable. They have Shia LaBeouf, and I don't know. So
Absolutely.
on the plus side, the only good thing I can think about this one is that involved in like the commercial. There's or the trailer. There's one of the Transformers riding a robot dinosaur. So like that that like almost hits my lizard brain where it's like I can be burned as many times as I want, but if you throw a robot on a robot dinosaur, like it's hard for me. I can't look away. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah,
know.
of
Did you see
course.
any of the other ones? Did you see any of the first three Transformers?
You know what? I saw the first one, and I will be honest, I wasn't angry at it. I wasn't. The first one,
Hmm.
I went and saw it in the theater with a big group of friends. I think I was still, I was in college.
The
I was
first one
that
was
age,
much better than the second two. I'll tell you that.
and it was fun. Of course, it was overly cheesy, but guess what? So was the original. There was nothing toned down about the original other than the fact that it was literally animation. But it was
Fair, yeah.
it was exactly what I expected of a Transformers movie.
And it's like I shouldn't. I feel like this is a situation where I should curb any anger I may feel because this is like so directly aimed at basically like 13-year-olds or um, which is fine. Teenagers need movies too, and movies for
Teenagers is how movies make a lot of their money. So yeah,
yeah, movies aimed at them aren't necessarily movies aimed at me.
right.
Um, well, moving on. Have you ever heard of this movie Snowpiercer? It's an Ethan Hawke one. Or sorry,
No,
not Ethan Hawke. It's Chris Evans. Sorry, with Tilda Swinton. It's got Ed Harris. It's like kind of a post-apocalyptic thing where
I do love me post-apocalyptic
yeah,
content.
it's where the survivors of basically like the the movie The Day After Tomorrow where there's like a big snowstorm that basically just encapsulates the earth.
Yeah,
There's survivors of the human race in a situation like that. They
right.
survive because they're on a train that runs perpetually around the earth on basically like a track that doesn't stop.
Okay.
The science of it is kind of ridiculous. The really interesting part is that the focus, like the most, like the focus of the book is, or sorry, it was based on a Japanese comic book. Um, is that it's like you have like the lower classes in the back, the higher classes in the front, but the whole thing is that when you have and there's like 1,000, it's like something like there's like 1,000 train cars, and it sounds like a little cheesy, but what the thing is like balance, like we are talking with space shuttles and stuff like that, is this is all of humanity that balancing keeping a balance of like food to plants to organic matter to people to populations, like all of that must be like protected really 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 carefully. um, and so it pits sort of like biosphere or like we were talking about like Mars One style population dynamics and like planning with class warfare. And it's also directed by a Jun Ho Bong, the guy who did the host, I believe. And it's like super violent and it's kind of crazy. Like I've kind of like fallen in love with a lot of Korean cinema because it's just sort of
Wait, what's it called?
it's called Snowpiercer. It's kind of a terrible
Pierce.
name.
Yeah,
Um,
whatever.
but yeah, I saw. So it came out in Korea a couple years ago or a year ago. So I actually watched it legally from my
Right.
computer. Um, and
I'll talking.
And it was like it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. It's sort of like it's
So
not.
wait, it's an American-made movie that they released in Korea, or
It's
they made it?
I think it's a joint production. So it
Okay.
was, I think it's technically a Korean movie, except the majority of it's in English.
There's
Um,
a cast, or
but one of the main characters is Korean. One of the main characters and his daughter is Korean.
okay.
But it's majority in English. Yeah, I mean, if you watched it for all intents and purposes, you would think it was an English movie, or sorry, you would think it was an American movie, except the style. It does have a lot of stylish ticks that are more common to Korea than here, such as like big, insane knife fights in long hallways and stuff like that. It has some of the more crazier action scenes I've seen in a long time as well.
Wait, you
And
think that's more Korean? Or there's an
yeah, it had a couple scenes that
individual by the name of Steven Seagal who made his very bizarre career on things just like that.
true. This was actually this was well, it was for me, it was a little bit reminiscent of that, the sort of like the really famous scene from Old Boy, where there was like a, something like that. But check it out and see what you think. But that gives,
I will.
I wouldn't, it's not a movie I would say is an A plus. I'd say it's more like a B plus. But like the stuff that's cool is really cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
and we've talked about this a lot, and I think you've actually said it. You know, I get made fun of a lot because people challenge me to name movies that I didn't like,
mm-hmm.
and there's plenty of movies I don't like, but I don't write off a movie if it's a B movie, or if it looks kind of stupid, or even if it seems really ridiculously over the top. Like classic bad movie that I will still watch is Waterworld. Stupid movie, terrible movie, but it's still fun to watch.
I fucking love Waterworld.
I have no problem with it. But you put it well that like even in a terrible movie, you might get one or two really significant or interesting or funny moments or something. There's something in that film that you will find
Mm-hmm.
that is going to open your eyes to something. It's going to make you think about something differently, or you're just going to genuinely enjoy it. And you'll miss out on so many of these moments if you write off movies just because they might be kind of stupid.
Yeah, I call it the John Carpenter effect.
John Carpenter is the ultimate film student.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He's a film student. He makes these films that are very much look like they were made by some senior at Tisch, but like they are always interesting. They always have something interesting to say, and they might look very cheesy, like it was made by a kid, but like it's obviously made by someone who has a very specific voice and a very specific view on our social, on our culture and our socioeconomic status.
Yeah, I kind of see them. I love John Carpenter, and he's kind of like the equivalent of a really, really good pulp novelist, where he made his movies really cheap. That's one of the reasons he could make so many of them. And using basically non-stars some of which turned into stars, like Jamie Lee Curtis and a couple other examples. Did all of his own music himself. Oh, the music is awesome too.
Yeah.
One of his friends from film school was his special effects guy. Used a lot of kind of like B-movie monster things, like stuff like that. But in all of his movies, at least all the ones I can remember, like it's not front and center, but there's a strong social commentary, like a strong core of, like They Live is like my favorite example of that.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, come for the goofy alien movie, stay for the interesting treatise on social welfare and class warfare. You know what I mean?
Right. Another filmmaker like that is Paul Verhoeven.
Oh yeah.
Who makes these? I remember seeing I was in the theater and I saw a preview for Starship Troopers, and the whole audience laughed, and I laughed too because it looked so stupid. And then you watch it and you're like, okay, but this is actually really interesting, especially when you consider it's the novel it's based on and who wrote the novel, and the novel was written in all earnest. The novel was written in all seriousness, and he was the author's name.
I read Robert Heinlein. He's the guy I mentioned earlier.
Right.
The novel was an example of him at his he was famously very conservative, and that the novel was an example of him at his most conservative.
Yeah, but there's
Where
a nuclear weapon in every soldier's hand. Anybody who's not on our side, the enemy is not only the enemy; they're just flat out green insects, alien, and that's how he felt about the Japanese. Like not a good guy. And then you take someone like Paul Verhoeven, who makes that movie totally ironically.
he said that it was based. I mean, he based part of because Paul Verhoeven, he was also famously he was in Amsterdam during the Holocaust, and he had to walk. He had some story about walking down a street where the Nazis had somebody from Amsterdam had basically had killed a Nazi like guerrilla style, like in the city, and so they took out a bunch of prisoners of war and just basically capped them in the middle of the street and then forced everyone in the neighborhood to walk by it. And that was he cited that as one of his biggest influences for Starship Troopers when creating like the Federation. Like while it's sort of it's spoofy, and I think that he almost underplayed it where a lot of people didn't get the satire. There's a reason that everybody in that movie is they're from Argentina, but they're blonde and they speak English, and this was sort of in a certain way this was like his vision of what if possibly like what if the Nazis had won, or sort of it was drawn from his experiences with a totalitarian regime, more or less.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, I could go on about Starship Troopers, but
Yeah.
I can leave it alone.
Yeah, I think it's getting about time to kind of get this thing wrapped up. Any last thoughts or anything you want to plug? Any blogs or articles you got up or anything like that before we head up?
No, I know I've said I think I want to encourage people to check out Mars One. I think nothing will influence. As I was saying earlier, I know Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks that it's going to take large government initiatives to get us to Mars, and that might be true. But I think also maybe nothing will motivate our governments to do something than the notion that a nationless group of people like Mars One is going to get to Mars before any government can, and then maybe everybody will start racing to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everybody should go support Mars One. They're nonprofit; they take donations.
Sounds good. All right,
but
cool.
That's all I got. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, Josh, it was a pleasure, man. Like to have you back sometime. Most definitely.
Anytime, my friend.
All right, talk to you soon.